The reason I mention that is on that particular day, because I broke 3 ribs in the plane crash and I was a bit of discomfort. Anyone who's broken ribs, it's uncomfortable. And if you're about to go and drive a Grand Prix car, and Sid Watkins organised to give me an injection, which I'm pretty sure must have been horse tranquilizer, because I had a big passion for hay the rest of that weekend. I felt no pain. And funnily enough, I didn't get drug tested that weekend. So I think he probably, saw that I wanted to race and gave me that particular injection. But what it did to me was basically streamline my life. There was a lot of things that I was doing because you felt you had to. You know how it is in life. You gain baggage through life. Some of it might be Louis Vuitton, but it's still baggage that needs to be carried. And it just made me refocus on who am I? What do I want to achieve? What am I thankful for? And I just basically started streamlining, cutting back, getting even more focused on what this opportunity was to be a Grand Prix driver. So I was engaged to be married. And well, I couldn't go through with that. So streamlining included cutting that part of my life out.
Right.
I did.
Folks, please welcome to the stage the ridiculously accomplished Mr. David Coulthard.
Thank you.
Come and take a seat, sir.
That's great. The thing that's always worrying when you get such a big build-up is it can only be downhill from there. But thank you very much.
It's not a bad CV for a Scots lad.
I know, a little village boy. I grew up in a village called Twynham, which, if anyone's familiar with the A75 from Carlisle to Stranraer, then you would have driven past Twynham. It's a blink and you miss it place. But hey, I was lucky enough to have a family that were supportive, and when I said that I'd love to be a Grand Prix driver, they didn't laugh at me. They supported it, and it took me on that road.
Well, you've done very well, sir. You've mentioned your family, and what very few people will know, and we've got lots of family businesses in here today, is that your family business is actually in the third generation haulage business. Yeah. So given that very few businesses even survive beyond the first 5 years of startup, never mind going into the second generation, now into the third generation, I'm really curious to understand what you know about successful business, like successful SME businesses, given the fact that you've witnessed this business move through 3 generations?
Well, I think the thing that many of you will be able to relate to, and certainly if you put yourself not as a business leader, but if you put yourself as a customer, what is customer service? And what I learned at a very early stage in my life journey, as a transport business, it's not sexy. People pay the money for you to get 20 pallets of Coca-Cola from London to Glasgow or whatever it is. But the customer service is not doing what they expect you to do. Of course, that's part of it, but it's about how you react when things go wrong. That's when the customer service is there. And if anyone enters business, there's going to be things that go wrong occasionally. And if I look at where I ended up in my racing career, even the most successful guys in that sport, Lewis Hamilton's won more than 100 Grand Prix, 7 World Championships. But he's entered, 400 odd Grand Prix? So he's had a lot more failure than success. And I know there's all the sort of cliche expressions out there about you don't learn anything in success. Well, you do. You learn you've achieved your goals. But in business life, not every deal is going to be the one that rings the bell. And there will be things that go wrong from time to time. But it's how you deal with your customers, I think, that really defines the customer service. And I think we can all relate to that, whether it's in our own business or whether it's when we're traveling. How do we feel when we're passing through airports? How do people deal with us? So that was something that was instilled in me at a very early stage. And given that I wasn't the best Grand Prix driver, the fact that I was able to explain to the team that I'll get it right next time served me well, because I made a lot of mistakes in my journey. But I think that when you've got an underlying willingness to work hard and to try and amend any issues that you've got, then I think people will work with you on that.
Yeah. Work ethic and responding to crisis rather than reacting. You've mentioned your family straight out of the gate. You speak very fondly of your mum and dad. I read your wonderful book, The Winning Formula. And again, what people may not know is your father was a dyslexic. He was told in school that he was disruptive, that he wouldn't amount to anything. All of those things we sadly typically hear from people who don't understand the condition. He took the business on whenever your grandfather passed away at 44. He was very young when he took it. And there's a lovely story that I kind of discovered as part of finding out a little bit more about you, that he opened the cupboard one day during a very, very difficult time, and he spotted a solitary can of Heinz beans, and I suspect his heart sank. Can you share with our audience what he did next?
Yeah. So, as you say, my father was dyslexic. He got sent off to boarding school when his father passed away, and he had a horrible time because wasn't academically good, threw himself into sports, and not that I went to boarding school, and I certainly don't speak Latin, but he won the Victor Ladorum, which I believe is the champion of champions, twice there, because sport was where he could be successful and where he could find his space, because it certainly wasn't in the classroom. So when he comes out the side of that to take over the transport business, and it was not doing particularly well, what he had developed was the communication skills to get along with people. He had to develop those because he didn't have the sort of deliverables in other areas. And he tells the story about looking at the back of this tin of beans and getting the number for Heinz and calling up and saying, I'm calling to speak to the transport manager. Oh, I forget what's his name again? And the person on the switchboard saying, oh, that's Mr. Smith. Oh, yeah, exactly, Mr. Smith. Put me through to Mr. Smith. And he gets through, and then he says, I believe you're having some issues with your distribution into Scotland. I'm just going to be passing by your offices later this afternoon. Would you like? And he went, oh, that's funny. We are having difficulty with our distribution. So it was a complete winging it moment that led to him then, as a company, we worked with Heinz for the next 20-odd years as their main distributor of products up into Scotland. And there's many tales of long-term relationships that the family business has built when there's bigger transport companies out there. But he really placed an emphasis, along with my mother, in building those personal relationships. And of course, business has evolved. Things have changed. It's more difficult to go and have dinners and social events with people in the same way that maybe you could in the past. But it hasn't lost its importance, building personal relationships. And if I look at the things that I learned from my parents going into this world that we didn't know, they knew transport, but motor racing, we didn't know motor racing. There was no one in car racing in my family. And when I had transitioned from karting into cars at 17, I won both the championships that we'd entered with a family team, running it out of the family truck garage, beating the established British teams because we just had attention to detail. It was really, really important to us, so we took care of all that. And that led to me being awarded a Young Driver Award, which was called the McLaren Autosport Young Driver of the Year. And that meant I get the chance to drive a Formula One car. So not only have we entered this foreign world and had a first-year success, I'm now going to get to drive a car that I've only dreamt about watching it on television. And I remember getting the information and calling my parents, as I did every day, and saying, I've been given this date at Silverstone to go and drive the Formula One car. And I was like, are you going to come down the night before? Are you traveling down in the morning? And my father said, they're testing you. They're not testing us. Go there, put your best foot forward, try not to crash, and call us afterwards. And it was a sort of cutting of the cord of we've guided you to this point, but this is your world. This isn't a transport seminar that we can come and add value. And I thought it was really interesting as well that it's that kind of, you get your opportunities to get in the door, but once you're in the door, you've got to have the skills and the energy and the commitment to make it happen for yourself.
We're building a picture here, the work ethic, the customer service, responding instead of reacting. And there's a word we use for what your father did in terms of looking at the can of beans, and rather than his heart sinking, thinking, I want to call them. It's being cute. We talk about it in this part of the world. So clearly a level of cuteness there on your dad's part. But I love that, the fact that he was seeking solutions and not problems. You know, we find what we're looking for, and Dr. Mitsu referenced it this morning. Jack spoke about the importance of being kind of, to paraphrase, a volunteer, not a victim. What's your view on self-agency, on kind of taking control of your own life and not being kind of, we talked about it, you know, not blaming others for the circumstances that you're in. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's a brilliant word, the blame word. And what I have learned through my journey in motorsport and competing in Formula One, which for those who don't know about Formula One, it's the pinnacle of automotive racing around the world. It's the fastest cars with the latest technology. A lot of that technology influences our everyday lives and the cars that we drive. So it's a real solution-finding business. It's not just a sport for sport's sake. But I was empowered as a kid anyway, so I guess it wasn't difficult for me to accept responsibility. You know, we're a very all-hands-on-deck family around the house, around the kitchen, all that sort of thing. So one of the things that I've experienced firsthand and like to, push out there to others is the responsibility culture. You know, in Formula One, and I expect in all professional sports, there just isn't a blame culture. There is a responsibility culture. Doesn't mean that occasionally people won't go off on one, but no leader, I believe, will have a sustained position if they're just about blaming. It's about empowering those within the team to have the confidence to go, that was me, and this is what I'm going to try and do to rectify it. And if you look at the chosen career that I had as a driver, if the car crashes, I say if the car crashes, there's only me behind the wheel at the point at which it crashed. So why would I even try and blame anyone else? Of course I'm responsible. If the wheel doesn't get put on at the pit stop, the person responsible for putting on the wheel nut, he doesn't spend any time trying to blame anyone else. So this responsibility culture, it goes through the whole environment. And what it does is enable a business to find solutions more quickly. Where I think it's one of the challenges for very big businesses where you've got thousands of employees, where you can sometimes have people lost in departments, not being very effective, maybe creating problems that they're not owning up to. And by the time the oil tanker can actually slow down and take stock, there's a lot of damage done. And if we look through the history of some great companies that have been leaders in their field that are no longer around because they didn't adapt, or they started to rest on their laurels, or in success, everybody can be each other's friends. But actually, you really truly find about your team when things are difficult. That's when you find out who your real team members are. And that's when you come back onto the point of which, right, there's our challenge right now. And I'm passing this on to my 15-year-old son who wants to be a racing driver. We don't have a big imagination in Scotland. I tried to get him into golf or tennis or anything, but he wants to be a racing driver. And whenever he starts to make excuses, I go, son, go and stand in that line, that very long line of people that are making excuses. Or own this moment and give me solutions. It's fine that you made a mistake. We all make mistakes. What are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Or if it does happen, it's a variation of this mistake, and it's not exactly the same one again, because otherwise, you're clearly not learning.
Yeah. No, that it resonates so strongly. Ironically, you mentioned it's your responsibility once you're in the car if you crash the car, and you got your very first break when, sadly, in 1994, Brazilian F1 legend Ayrton Senna crashed, was tragically killed, and Roland Ratzenberger was also killed the same weekend. I think Ayrton was the 43rd fatality, and you were called to step into that car at that point in time. We speak a lot about mindset. We heard about it this morning. Jack referenced that 50% of the success is between your ears. And we talk about psyche being the very first principle of scaling. What did you do at that point in time to get your mindset into a place, being called to step into a car where somebody was tragically killed, someone else was killed, and you now knew that you were going to step into this car where the rate of fatality, the probability of being killed is quite high? Tell me what that's like and what's going through your mind at that stage.
Well, the first thing, of course, that was an incredibly shocking period for the sport, and it set off a new drive towards safety, because I think over a period of time there hadn't been a fatality in Grand Prix racing for quite some time, and of course a little bit of taking things for granted had set in. But the first thing I did was, as the test driver for the team, I'd worked with Ayrton, I'd driven the car that he then had taken into the first 3 Grand Prix of that year. I was still racing in what is effectively Formula 2. It was called Formula 3000 back in those days. So that particular weekend, I was racing at Silverstone when they were in the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola. And on the Sunday morning, I was living in Milton Keynes, which lovely place, not a holiday destination, I would say, but that's where a lot of the teams were based around there. And I was sharing a house with some mechanics, and I got one of the old-fashioned faxes, came through, and it was a good luck message from the team, including Ayrton, who was wishing me luck for qualifying on the Sunday because I was racing on the Monday. And then later that day, I watched on television, like many people did, the crash, and then the realization that he'd been killed in that crash. Because I had already been integrated with the team for a few years, and we're a data-driven business. The cars today are designed, the concepts are developed within CFD. Data drives everything that we do within the Formula One world before we even manufacture and put the car on track. Data's obviously moved, it's become a lot more powerful since it was in the early 90s. But using the black box within the car, I wanted to know from the engineers that what was the cause of that failure. Was it driver error? Was it a manufacturing issue? And the data just goes black or white. And there was no information there to tell me that there was an issue with the integrity of the car. So the first thing is, it's then either driver error or just the racing gods had decided on that day. Because there's certain things that you just can't control, debris on the track and other things like that. So armed with the information that I didn't feel that there was any reason why that car was any more dangerous today than it was when I drove it in February, initially testing and developing the car, then I had no fear in the integrity of the team. I couldn't replace Ayrton. Ayrton was arguably the greatest driver in the history of the sport, but all I could do was honor him by giving 100%, and that was my mantra through my whole career. I was able to win some Grand Prix in my journey. I didn't win the World Championship. I got beaten by better performers, but I was able to compete in the sport and leave the sport knowing that I gave 100%. So I was totally at peace when I came to the end of my journey, because I left nothing on the table in my physical preparation, my mental preparation, integrating with the team, trying to get the best out of every single member of that team, to motivate them to work the long hours that are necessary. And life, sadly, will end in death, hopefully at the end of a long journey. But life is dangerous. We none of us get out of this alive. But my drive and desire to want to compete at the highest level and find out where I fitted in meant that when I was offered the chance to be the race driver for Williams, it was not even a question. Arguably, my greatest risk, I was in a plane crash in 2000 where sadly the pilots were killed, and I was given a second chance at life. They were sitting 2 meters away from me and they lost their lives. They had wives, they had children, their whole family's lives have been changed. And that had nothing to do with racing. Accidents can happen in many different ways. And sadly, I'm sure many of you here have had to deal with trauma in your own life, but we just have to keep moving forward. We have to take the opportunities that are given to us and to try and carve our own opportunities as well. And that tragedy led to my 15 seasons as a Grand Prix driver. And it's been an amazing apprenticeship for life, because the things that I learned within that journey, within that sport, has really given me so much opportunity and so much confidence not to fear trying anything. You know, I'm not a risk taker. I would say I was risk averse. But just because I don't know something doesn't mean that I can't play a part within that industry. I didn't know how to design and build a racing car, but thankfully I knew people who did. So I was like the customer to the Formula One team. And there's no better example of customer service than when you come for the pit stop. Because in this multi-million pound technology-driven business, in what is a very digital world, the analog moment of a car arriving, 20 mechanics, 4 wheels off, 4 wheels on, within 2 seconds. There's nothing scientific beyond the materials that have put the wheel guns together. It's just human performance, and it's bringing together people that, you know, are you left-handed, are you right-handed, all of those good basics to get the maximum amount of human performance. So at that moment, I'm the customer. I'm looking for a 2-second customer service. If I get it, what a brilliant team of people. And I don't know if any of you have taken your car into Quick Fit or anywhere recently, but you weren't getting a 2-second service.
I'm conscious we don't have a budget for a therapist, but I have to bring you back to the plane crash, if I may. I've never spoken to anyone who's been in a plane crash, and I just can't imagine, as you say, a few feet away from you, the 2 pilots were tragically killed. You stepped on a plane a few days later. What has that done to strengthen or deepen your self-awareness and really think about the second life that you've got? What decisions did you make at that point? You know, driving a car which you're trained for and you feel very competent and comfortable in is one thing. You know the risks, but when we get on a plane, you know, we don't think we're going to be involved in a potential fatality. So what decisions did you make beyond that? And, you know, how do you live life now beyond that?
Well, for me, it was transformational. And it's tragic, of course, that it took something like that to sort of give me a bit of a shake. I just turned 30 years old. I was at the sort of peak of my experience and my racing career, and it all could have been taken away, like tragically and sadly it was for the pilots in that moment. And it was a real stop, look at oneself. How am I living my life? You know, do I want to fly again? Not really. Can I be in my career without flying? No, therefore I'm going to have to fly again. Do I want to race, which is considered, you know, a reasonably high risk career? And my drive and my passion and enjoyment for working within a team, and I'm a team person. The driver's seen as the one spraying the champagne, but when they thank their team, it's a heartfelt, absolutely sincere appreciation of all the brilliant men and women that gave you that platform, that opportunity to drive these wonderful race cars and to win the Grand Prix. You know, it's a wonderful space to live. And anyway, out of the back, the plane crash was on the Tuesday. The Spanish Grand Prix, as any other Grand Prix, started on a Thursday. So a few days later, I'm back on a plane. I'm going to the Grand Prix. The chief medical officer for Formula One at that time was a gentleman called Sid Watkins, and he was head of neurosurgery at London Hospital. And our sport is regulated under the WADA, the drug-taking testing facility, like any other international sport. So, you know, throughout my career, I had to give a time every single day when I was available at a certain location to be drug tested. The reason I mention that is on that particular day, because I broke 3 ribs in the plane crash and I was a bit of discomfort. Anyone who's broken ribs, you know, it's uncomfortable. And if you're about to go and drive a Grand Prix car, and Sid Watkins organised to give me an injection, which I'm pretty sure must have been horse tranquilizer, because I had a big passion for hay the rest of that weekend. I felt no pain. And funnily enough, I didn't get drug tested that weekend. So I think he probably, you know, saw that I wanted to race and gave me that particular injection. But what it did to me was basically streamline my life. There was a lot of things that I was doing because you felt you had to, or you know how it is in life. You know, you gain baggage through life. Some of it might be Louis Vuitton, but it's still baggage that needs to be carried. And it just made me refocus on who am I, what do I want to achieve, what am I thankful for, and I just basically started streamlining, cutting back, getting even more focused on what this opportunity was to be a Grand Prix driver. So I was engaged to be married, and well, you know, I couldn't go through with that. So streamlining included cutting that part of my life out. I did eventually get married to someone else, but the partner I had at that time, you know, sometimes you're getting into something because it feels that that's what you should do, rather than it's because you've really given it the thought and the due diligence to make sure this is a life-enhancing experience, rather than just, you know, well, I'm 30 and we've been together for 4 years, so this is what we should be doing. It just gave me a renewed focus on what's important. And I'm much, much better today, and certainly after that point, than I was in the first phase of my life, in knowing how to be efficient with my time.
What I'm really curious to understand, so hopefully none of us will ever have to go through a plane crash to kind of waking up and reflect on things that we're resisting or doubling down on a goal. But you doubled down on that goal. You felt there were certain things that weren't going to be aligned to you achieving the goal that you'd set out. You clearly went through a reflection process. What did that process look like? I'm really curious to kind of get super tactical so we can go, you know, was that a week in the woods? Was that, you know, you took up meditation? Was it breath work? Was it fire walking? You know, what did that reflection process look like for you to actually come out the other end and go, no, this is what I really want to do? And that then, what I'm hearing is that then becomes like a really strong magnet to pull you through any kind of challenge, including the trauma of coming through a plane crash and Ayrton, you know, tragically being killed in the car. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it enabled me to be more open to all forms of support. Up until that point, I had my trainer, I was physically fit, you know, I had a dietitian, but I hadn't really experienced or had been that open to sort of sports psychology, and really, you know, you mentioned earlier the power of the brain, and trying to analyze the human potential that I had beyond just jumping in a car. You know, this is something I've been doing since I was 11 years old in karting. So when you do something from a very young age, there's an element in yourself of just taking it for granted. But I think it enabled me to really sit down and take myself back to basics, and then say, right, what does modern science offer today that I'm not exploiting? How can I exploit all of my potential rather than just the bits that I know how to do? And I left no stone unturned in just seeking help in every single area to make sure that I was as mentally as well prepared as possible. Physically, I was already in a good space, but you can always do more. And just streamlining to be efficient. And it's not about how many hours you're spending in the gym. It's about the efficiency of that and the recovery time and diet and all of those other things that you would imagine we would be on top of. But, you know, I was in that transitional phase of Formula One where data and sports science was really growing to today. The young drivers have so much at their disposal, as do all athletes across all sports. So it was having an openness really to expose myself in areas that I hadn't done before. And it's that learning process, isn't it? Just because you are the CEO doesn't mean that you're exempt from criticism. Doesn't mean that it's everyone else's fault. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't learn something. And so it was that really that enabled me to then, I went through a period of even enhanced performance. My results were better, my efficiency was better, And it's getting back to basics. It's coming to events like this, giving your time to come to events like this, because you'll take something away that will stimulate a thought, a connection will be made, a new business contact. I get so excited when I see groups of people together. You know, the bigger the team, the more excited I get. When I joined Red Bull towards the end of my career, there was 400 people. That was the old Jaguar team, unsuccessful, owned by Ford. And Mr. Manischitz, the founder of Red Bull, instilled in us the opportunity to build that team into what's become one of the most successful teams today, winning world championships. An energy drinks company beats Ferrari, beats Mercedes, beats these automotive companies. So it's not the name above the door that buys you success. It's the investment in the team, in the people. And it's painful when you're building a team because not everybody fits in the role that they've been given, and not everybody matures into a role that would be considered, you know, an elevated role. But that's where the brutal honesty of leadership comes in. And in sport, we have no problem. Ronaldo, Messi, brilliant footballers. But the moment they don't score goals for your national team or they don't score goals for your team, you have no problem then being put on the bench and the 17-year-old being brought in. Because you want your sports team to be the best. You don't want them to live in the legacy of a name of the past. So those difficult decisions about evolving your team, bringing on the young members of your team, and again, sport is a brilliant teacher in that respect about if you're good enough, you're old enough. We have no problem a 17-year-old winning Wimbledon or stepping up to take a penalty in an FA Cup final. A lot of companies would be nervous about putting a 17-year-old in charge of a department, unless it was a new evolution department that only the 17-year-olds could know about. Yeah. But actually, it's about the right people in the right role.
It's so true. We have this paradigm in business that you go through this career ladder and you should only be awarded things really at certain ages. I want to bring you back to something because what I'm hearing is the importance of leaning on others, seeking out the who for the how, as we talk about. Jack referred this morning to the swim coach, you know, surrounding yourself with good people. That makes sense, and it's having that humility to actually put your hand up and say, actually, there's potentially somebody better out here, and I'm gonna spend time with somebody better. Is there anything practically you do? I had the privilege of spending lunch with you. You're a really cool character. You kind of walk up onto the stage. It's all very, very easy. Is there anything that you do, whether it be breath work? We have the wonderful Neil O'Murray who's going to guide us in a workshop and a breathing practice this afternoon. Anything that you do that we can kind of take away, say, look, there's a couple of things that are anchors for me before I get into a race car, before I get on a plane, before I step up on stage, before I go into an important business meeting. Anything like that, tactically?
Well, I've always worked on the basis that everything matters. Obviously, there's a priority list of things that you need to deal with, but everything matters. And so going to a Grand Prix, from before I left my home, how I packed my bag, you know, thinking through the weekend, the more that you put yourself in the space of the environment of the thing you're about to do, the earlier you can do that ahead of time. We all know when we're winging it, and we all, of course, we're human, so sometimes we're winging it because we haven't given the time or we haven't had the time. But as a professional sports person, which is what I was highly paid to do, it was my duty to give the time for everything, the walkthrough of how am I getting to Melbourne, what time of day am I arriving, which hotel am I going to be in, how is my recovery day going to be, to arriving at the track. I went through every day, every element, allocated time for, and I don't want to say something that sounds wanky, sorry for that word, but you know,
we get it.
How much time will it take me to get through the fans, of which I'm a fan of the sport. I grew up a fan of the sport, but as a driver, to get in the circuit, how much time can I allocate to then make sure I arrive in the track to be at my meeting in time. How much time am I allocating for my lunch? Hydration and the food you take is really important. So I just had all that planned out. So nothing was a surprise. So then the surprises that do come, where, Schumacher cuts you up or whatever it is, you've got spare capacity because everything else is really planned and organized. So of course, breathing, sleeping, your health and well-being, all of those things are important because everything matters in human performance. How much sleep you're getting, how much laughter you're enjoying with your friends. So it's not all just work, work, work. Recovery is a huge part of training, which I didn't know growing up in a village in Scotland. But as I went through my evolution of life and started to work with professionals who worked with, Olympic athletes, then you start to go, oh, actually, that makes sense. Of course it matters. Hydration and all those elements. So it's preparation. It's taking care of every detail. And the minute I tell myself, oh, that doesn't matter, even if it's way, 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 way down the list, because we can't do everything, I just turn it into everything matters.
Yeah, I'm trying to coach my son on that at the moment. He's 16 years old, and I keep telling him how you do anything is how you do everything. So we're trying. He wants to be a footballer, which means he doesn't want to do anything at school. I said, no, if you work hard at school, you become a better footballer. So what I'm hearing is being really intentional about what it is you're going to do, visualizing that performance, and then reverse engineering from there. You talk a lot about team since we started this conversation. Red Bull, you mentioned. What I found fascinating whenever I was researching Formula One is the extent of these businesses. You have 60 or 80 people on race day, but actually sitting behind those 60 to 80, you shared with me, I thought it was like 800 or 900. You said Red Bull is now thousands of people. How do these teams, and Jack referred to it this morning, that sports teams are much better than businesses. How does this team, this Formula One team, align behind this couple of hours on a Sunday, getting thousands of people to be so dialed in? Because from a business perspective, that's what we're striving for every day, to get everybody marching in the same direction. Yeah. What are you guys doing to do that?
There's a relentless line of communication, and it's something that I've had to remind myself with businesses I'm involved. You mentioned Whisper. Whisper is a business that I was a co-founder of 13 years ago, and it was 3 of us. We're 300 people now, largest growing production business in Europe. And I have to constantly remind myself about if I don't play my part in communicating with the new arrivals as to why are we different, what is it that we're trying to do different to other production companies, then I'm failing in the very element of what we have continually done within the sports team. You've got to have a clear communication between what's happening on the front line and what that then means in terms of back at the factory. What are the elements that are working and what are the mission critical potential failures? So to that end, you see a Grand Prix, and I'm assuming most people have heard of Formula One at least, or you've maybe watched it. Is there any hardcore fans here?
We have a few.
Two and a half. So, the Grand Prix happens, the champagne gets sprayed, the drivers who are on the podium go off to the official press conferences, and then they go back into a debrief. And that debrief isn't sitting there going, Max, you're amazing, or Lewis, you're amazing, you won the Grand Prix, well done you. They'll sit there and they'll go, Max, on lap 22, you lost time at turn 8. And he'll go, yeah, I brake too late. So he's got it in his mind anyway, but they're analyzing, because that data has been sent, and basically then the data points that tell us where our performance drop-offs are, it's played back an hour after the race. That discussion amongst the engineers, 20 engineers in the room there, is being a live connection back to the factory, where there'll be all of the relevant departments are there listening to what are the mission critical things. have we got an issue in aero? Do we have an issue in cooling? Do we have a lifing issue on the gearbox? So by the time people come in on Monday morning, it's not, hey, what a great Grand Prix, we won the Grand Prix. There's already a hit list of what are the things that need to be rectified, mission critical points, and where are the areas that we need to develop, because we've got sound analysis and data that tells us where our competitors are quick. So we know where our performance is good and we know where our competitors are better. So we're constantly trying to, and that changes during the course of the year, depending on people's developments and upgrades that they bring. So the communication lines have to be absolutely key so that you're not missing a working hour. We don't come in and, congratulate everyone for the first hour of the day. Everyone comes in to the main hall, and whether win or lose, there's an explanation from, if it's the team principal who in Europe has come back to the factory, or if they're doing back-to-back races in Brazil and Mexico, places like that, there'll be some other senior member of the team addresses the shop floor and explaining, right, these are the challenges, this is what. So it just keeps everybody feeling like their fingers on the pulse. Yeah. And as you get bigger as a business, that becomes more challenging to get everyone together. And sometimes it can be seen as have we really got anything to talk about today that we haven't mentioned last week? I think they're still vitally important to have those communications in place.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is this relentless desire to improve, and whilst when I'm listening to that, it's easy to say that, oh, well, that's easy for Formula One. There's, lots of money swashing around. There's the most sophisticated data intelligence that you could imagine in any business. We don't have that in SME businesses, but at the core, what we're saying here is communication, and everyone, regardless of the size, can debrief after an important project.
Absolutely. Yes, the data's there. Of course, we have all that analytics, but with AI today, if it was as simple as just feeding in the rules and regulations, then all the teams would be as quick as each other, because that would churn out identical cars. It's still always about human performance. And to get people on a Zoom call is not an expensive thing to do. Everyone has a mobile device today. And to get people, if you are an office-based or a manufacturing-based business, to take half an hour before everything starts to get everyone in the same room and explain firsthand what are the challenges, what are the mission-critical things that we need to work on, rather than it sort of being passed down the line, is not difficult. It's an excuse. And as I say to my son, get in the line of all those people who want to make excuses, or get in this line where you're finding solutions.
You're always very praiseworthy about Red Bull and how Red Bull operated as a team. You are always very complimentary about Christian Horner. What was it about Red Bull that differentiated Red Bull as in terms of the way they operated versus the other companies, the other Formula One teams that you drove for?
Well, I mentioned that the team that became Red Bull was called Jaguar, and it was owned by the Ford Motor Company. And I had been talking to that team prior to Red Bull buying, and I decided I'd rather retire than race for Jaguar, which maybe sounds a bit blunt. Nothing against Jaguar as a brand. My father drives a Jaguar. He tells me it's a very good car. But in terms of the Formula One team, they operated on the basis of writing nice, lengthy reports, flying out to Detroit, presenting to whoever was overseeing the budget for the Formula One team, justifying what they had done, what had worked, what it wouldn't work, and then they would come back again. That, based on my experience of having worked with McLaren and Mercedes, where there is a reporting structure, but they don't spend a lot of time creating volumes of reports. They spend a lot of time finding action points and deploying those action points, because a report, it's history. It's gone, and you're never going to refer to that again. You need actions. You need, what are the solutions we need to find? And when Red Bull were bought, I went to meet with Mr. Mateschitz, the founder of Red Bull as we know it, and he'd already been a sponsor of Sauber. And I really wanted to understand, does he have the financial resource, which they're a multi-billion-pound business, they've got the financial resource, but does he understand the power of the people and how we need to change the mentality from this corporate structure to being nimble and light and decision-led, and empower the team to get on with running the team rather than having to fly to Austria and justify decisions, judges on the results. And he was absolutely, yeah, look, you guys are here to make this team successful in the future. And with that commitment, I decided I wasn't going to retire, and I spent the last 4 years of my career laying in place the foundations of what I felt a winning team looked like. Christian Horner, who's led that team to great success, had never worked in Formula One before, and he was actually a bit younger than me. So he looked to me as an older member of Formula One to, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of this person? And what are the operating systems that you think that should be changed? And that was tremendously empowering. And I'd never been in that position before because arguably I was too young, or arguably McLaren already had that winning formula. So it's about making sure that you're an action-driven business rather than a report-driven business. Reports are great, but action's even better.
What is it that characterizes Christian Horner as a wonderful leader?
He's a racer at his core, would never claim to know about aerodynamics or engine design. Therefore, he's really curious and really passionate about the team and building and getting the right dynamic of the people working together. Because finding qualified people isn't difficult. Finding a great CV isn't difficult. Putting a group of individuals together who've got a great CV isn't difficult. But finding a team is difficult, because a team is when you've got a group of individuals who've got a willingness to take responsibility, to work together, to help when somebody looks like they're struggling. Because we can't all be on our A game every single day. We can aspire to it, but your favorite footballer doesn't always get the penalty. I'm pretty sure even the very best has missed a few, but more often than not, they're on their A game. And it's bringing together that team. And when you're a team, you can just look at your team member and you know each other so well, that look is like a conversation, as opposed to them going, what the hell are you looking at? Because they don't quite know what planet you're on or what that vision is. So having events where teams come together, even in this remote world that we live in today, where it is possible, it's still vitally important to really know who your team members are and constantly moving them into the roles that suit them best.
Yeah. A colleague of mine who's in the audience talks about the right jockeys on the right horse running the right race. You mentioned Whisper, one of the fastest growing companies in its industry. You've started that company. It's moved from being a micro business to a small business to a medium-sized business, now a large business. What have you brought from the sport into the company that's a non-negotiable, that's contrarian, let's say, to the way other businesses run?
Well, I can't possibly know if it's different to how other businesses run, but this, what I would call an all-hands-on-deck type approach, when we go into a production environment, I had the confidence to get involved in this business knowing nothing about television, because I knew nothing about designing and building a Formula One car, but it didn't stop me playing a key role within that industry. I think when I was younger, I was one of those guys that would keep my mouth shut for fear of saying the wrong thing. I have no problem today to ask questions and encouraging my team to ask questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Ask the question, why are we doing it that way? Because it may stimulate a thought as to actually, why do we do it that way? So I'm that person within the group. And, I love seeing creative people come together, whether it's our editors, whether it's our cameramen and women, whoever it is. And just taking brilliant young people and showing them that I believe in them. And if they get it wrong, support them. If they keep getting it wrong, then we need to have a conversation and we need to understand what it is that's not allowing them to reach their potential, what it is that means that maybe they're better suited in another role. So that that responsibility culture and giving them the real sensation that don't look at me as an investor, as a shareholder, look at me as a team member. How can you use me within the team environment? I'm pretty good at making tea. So when they're all busy doing the important stuff, I'll be deploying my skills in the canteen. But it's just having that sense of they're valued and they're important, because they are.
Yeah. Something else you say is, I don't want to run a company that is fifth best at what it does. I want to be first. So what else are you doing in the context of business to ensure that you're standing the top tier of the podium?
Well, we recognize the importance of everybody having an opportunity to play a part. So in that respect, Whisper, who incidentally Sony bought 30% of us just as we were going into COVID, because Sony are big in movies, they're big in music and electronics, but they didn't have sports assets, and we're very big across both male and female sports. And as a throwback from that, we're 50-50 in terms of our headcount, male and female employees. We have produced the last 2 Paralympics. The reason why we won that contract is we have a lot of disability within the organization. So it's not me trying to imagine what are the challenges. We live within that team environment because we have a number of team members that are dealing with that. And so I think what gives us a competitive advantage is that we accept this world as being a mix of different people. It's not a personality competition. It's a capability competition. Yes, it's great if we can all get along, but it's not, again, about all being friends. It's about having respect. It's about giving people opportunity and supporting those when they're having difficulties. So I think when I walk through the business today, and we've got offices in different locations, I feel immensely proud at what we've built because of that diversity, because of that inclusion that we have. And I know that gives us a competitive advantage, and we'll continue to keep driving down that route. And the goal when we started the business, and I'm standing with my 2 co-shareholders, was that one day we'd produce Formula One. Within 7 years, we'd won that contract. And the goal today is to be the biggest sports production business in the world. Just because we happen to be, in this territory, there's production going on all around the world. And, we'll aim high. If we come up short, we'll regroup and we'll try again. But the growth has been there because we don't set a sort of ceiling of, well, that's outside of our scope. It's about people. How can we bring the right people together and continue to grow? And I actually get more excited about that than the bottom line, which, our CFO wouldn't particularly like me saying that. But of course, any business, we want to make money. But if we can make money whilst investing in future opportunity and future talent, that's what really makes me feel that this life is a wonderful journey.
How important is that vision? How important is the communication of that vision? Jack spoke this morning about the importance of having goals. We heard from Norman as well, the importance of setting goals. We heard from Mitsu also about the importance of actually operating in that 20% where just between comfort and discomfort on the edge. How can we get that right when we're setting a vision? Because I suppose there's a sense that if we set it too big, people will say, well, that's just fantastical, and kind of sign out. If we don't set it at all, then people have nothing to work towards. How do you get that right? What's the right balance there in the context of the vision? You guys want to be the biggest in the world now, but at what point did that start to emerge?
I guess because I'd operated in a world championship. The world, although that world championship is 10 teams and 20 cars, so it's, the actual sport of Formula One, it's a multi-billion-pound business, but it's actually, as I say, 20 drivers, 20 individuals that are going out there on track. It's thousands of people that are behind building, designing, and doing all that. But because it is a true world championship, then that that thought of the world doesn't scare me. I've been doing a world tour for 30 years. I don't even think the Rolling Stones have managed to do every year for 30 years. So I think it's just a mindset of knowing that the borders and boundaries. It's giving people the understanding that we can go beyond the territory that we're in. Of course, there has to be localized or very targeted growth opportunities. And in the simple terms, in terms of production, that's winning contracts. We've recently won Roland Garros. For those of you into tennis, you'll know that's the home of the French Open. And we won that on the strength of the work we were doing with Wimbledon. To break through into taking that away from French production incumbents is I think a huge achievement for our team, because we're a largely British group of individuals that come together as our team. But we don't look at it as, we know we can do it because we've been doing it already. So we're not just sort of winging it. We've got the production capability, we've got the skill set. The areas that we don't have those skills, we'll go out and target bringing people on. And we always have an authenticity of someone that knows that sport as well as those that we're trying to sell to, because then we can never be caught out with not knowing. I don't know a lot about tennis. It looks a lovely sport. I've never really played it, but I don't need to. But the lead on my team does.
Yeah, brilliant.
And so it doesn't surprise me when. I'm genuinely surprised when we don't win contracts. But of course, we don't win them all. We're up against some brilliant competitors. But here's the other thing, actually, that I always tell the team. We should have so much respect for our competitors. We should have so much respect for those that have gone before us that are bigger organizations, because it's not easy. They haven't been gifted it. They've worked hard. There's been leadership there. There's been growth and sustained performance that's taken them to that position. I genuinely admire success. I've never been jealous of success. So if I was getting beaten by Michael Schumacher or beaten by Mika Hakkinen, shake their hand, analyze how did they achieve it, or how do I think they achieve it. And then when I was beating them on occasion, the pride I had, because I was never jealous. It was never, how are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because they're humans with a skill who've applied that and worked hard, brought themselves in an environment where the people around them can deliver for them. So I see it in a very simple way. I think you can make it sound more complicated, but ultimately it always comes down to people, whether it's those within your team or whether it's the customers that you're trying to target. They're humans.
Yeah, it's very, very profound. It all comes back to the people. And you talked about the people earlier in the context of, the customer service department for you, with those guys in the pit lane servicing you within 2 seconds, which just is mind-blowing what they do in 2 seconds. But it wasn't always 2 seconds. It was, 20, 30 seconds at one point in time. Something you speak a lot about is the application of marginal gains. It was a concept that certainly I heard for the first time from Sir David Brailsford. How have you brought this concept of marginal gains into the business? And before you answer that, what happens in those 2 seconds?
I guess most people would think 2 seconds isn't a very long time. But actually, in the context of that moment in that race, it's a huge amount of time. And you can feel if it's a 1.9 second pit stop, or you can feel if it's a 2.1 second pit stop, because you're so dialed in to that moment, that space, the feeling of those around you, that your time awareness becomes finely tuned. And when I moved from being a racing driver into working in television, the concept of being live on air on the BBC in 5 seconds, when some people would be panicking around, I'd be going, we've got 5 seconds, and I'd be asking someone a question, and you'd hear 2, 1. I've got a second to get myself ready and smile and get ready to get into the show. A second's long enough to get ready to smile. You don't need 10 seconds to do all that. So we have much more time to do things than we appreciate. when we get anxious about time, oh my God, I've only got an hour to get this done. An hour is a huge amount of time if you're efficient, if you're organized. So seeing time as your friend rather than time as your some sort of pressure enemy is something that I guess the environment, time has always been so important to what you're trying to achieve. And I don't know if anyone here in your roles or in life generally get anxiety about timing and being ready, but you can definitely work on that. You can definitely improve in just trusting in your preparation and working back to everything matters. If your preparation is right and you've taken the time, then those last moments before you have to do whatever it is that you're about to do, you'll find a comfort in that space. And then trust in yourself. You know, I trust in my team to give me a safe, fast racing car. They trust in me not to screw up too often. Occasionally, of course, we're human, we will. But trust is such an important part. And again, if you don't trust in your team, that's already a negative for your business. If you've got doubts about your team, I trust in my team. And if they're not delivering, that's a conversation. If I'm not delivering, I expect them to call me out on it and not be offended just because I happen to be, someone whose name is on the share certificate.
I think this saying of I don't have the time for that, it's a limiting belief that's certainly baked into definitely a paradigm on this island. We don't have the time. And it was something that certainly when I grew up, I heard a lot about, we don't have the time for that, or not having the money was another limiting belief, but not having time. And the fact that you guys can accomplish so much in 2 seconds is incredible. Neve's looking at me in the context of time. Moving into the close, whenever I'm interviewing anyone on the podcast, I always ask them to share with our audience 3 timeless takeaways. Before I do that, you've been around Irish people for a long time. Eddie Jordan's a good friend. Anyone who hasn't listened to the FFS podcast, what a brilliant name for a podcast, by the way. I encourage you to go and listen to the FFS podcast you do with Eddie. And of course, Mark Gilligan, who lined us up, made the introduction. You're around a lot of people from this island. What is it that makes you want to spend time with people on this island? And share something with the audience here that they probably don't know about themselves, but you've traveled the world, you've seen enough people, you've met enough people in different countries, but you keep coming back to a close-knit friendship group of Irish people.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? That you can't see yourself as other people see you. And pretty much covered the world, either in racing or in promotions. And I've been lucky enough to do that in a privileged position where when you're in that sort of spotlight of being a sports person, you're in an elevated opportunity to meet with royals and politicians and business leaders and people that, looking back to the environment I grew up, a small village with remarkably this transport company that grew out of the small village. So this gift of life has taken me in an incredible life experience. And the thing that always amazes me, and you locals won't get it because you'll probably, you're so immersed in it, but the friendliness, the warmth, the acceptance, the very grounded welcome in Ireland is like no other place in the world. Now, for those of you who live here who think that, that guy's an arsehole and this person's grumpy and all the rest of it, the thing is your perspective is just relative to everyone else who's within your environment. But in comparison to a lot of other spaces around the world, considering, I grew up on a cold, wet island and you're on a cold, wet island, considering the environments in which we've grown up, there's a lot of positivity and a lot of energy and a lot of can-do attitude and connectivity amongst the people here, which I think is your superpower. You know, that friendliness gives you an international superpower, because you can go and communicate with anyone else around the world who speaks English, of course, unless you speak a foreign language. And just the way you have about your delivery is wonderfully inclusive, disarming, and it makes you feel warm and welcome. So use that superpower when you go out there into the world.
Oh, I love that. It resonates so strongly.
Yeah.
Certainly in our previous business, we always encouraged the sales folk to win. If they didn't win the business, at least win an inward visit, because we knew that the probability of closing the deal would be much, much higher if we could just get the prospective customers to come over here.
Yeah,
and
it's brilliant. Well, I was saying to you, sorry to talk over you, but I'm back later this week in Galway, which I've never been to. I'm doing an event. I still occasionally put my racing suit on and do demonstrations. So I'll be driving the F1 car on the streets of Galway, which I'm really looking forward to. Spoke to my brother yesterday who's been there, and he said, oh, you've got to go to this place where they only serve Guinness and oysters and all this sort of good stuff. And then I'll be heading over to Dublin.
Morons on the Weir, it's called.
There you go. That's exactly what he said. And then I'm going to do a night in Dublin with an Irish friend on Monday, and then I'll jump on the flight to Las Vegas on Tuesday. And I'm genuinely excited about it, because I just know I'm going to have a great welcome and a good time.
Brilliant. Quick fire. Given the life that you've lived to date, this incredible life that you've lived to date, and many decades ahead of you, can you share with our audience 3 timeless takeaways?
Well, at this point, this is where I shouldn't be winging it, and I should have rehearsed this. But you know, life for me, and what I take away from the journey that I've been on is it's always going to be about the people you surround yourself with. And I've always surrounded myself with better people than myself in terms of their intelligence, creative abilities. They may not have had the confidence in their own selves, but life had given me confidence to believe that things are possible. So it's always going to be about team, and so that's not actually answering your question with 3 snappy little takeaways. But
surround yourself with great people. 1.
I thank you. Everything matters.
Yeah.
I think that, of course, time, we have to prioritize certain things, but if it's really, really important, if you're not prepared to give 100%, then why should anyone believe you? And the power of giving 100%, if I can get out of the village and not, have to marry my cousin, then I'm sure he wasn't that handsome, but lovely guy though. Let's do this as a team. Help me through the third one.
The very final question for the petrol heads in here. What car do you drive, and what sort of horsepower is she?
I'm a Mercedes driver, but I've actually got no idea what horsepower it's got, because I trust in my team, my sales team, to know that it's got enough to get me around the world. So, yeah, but there's lots of great cars out there. But if you're needing a wee pointer or a discount on a Mercedes, I might have a close link to a dealer.
There you go, folks. There's a lot of people in here that love a good deal, so there'll probably be a queue for you whenever you step down off the stage. Folks, please can you give it up for the wonderful David Coulthard.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.